usuku omunye usolakala ukusiphusha imali bayamsaba abakwazi ukuthi bamface bakhulume naye face to face. So the best solution ukuthi akabulawe.
In South Africa, there's something called the taxi mafia. The taxi mafia is stronger and more feared than most of the South African police force and the military. It often has more influence on the country than the actual government, and they are ruthless and won't hesitate to kill. Now before you start imagining guys with greasy hair sitting in a yellow sedan, the taxis in South Africa look nothing like what you see in the US or Europe. They're basically 16-seater Toyota Quantums that are always carrying more than 16 people.
That's 3, 10, 16, 25, 34, 35.
There are more than 200,000 taxis in South Africa, but they only follow a select number of specific routes in and around cities. 200,000 taxis, all competing for the same routes. That's why the actual taxi drivers only make around $150 a month, even though the industry itself is worth $1.2 billion and carries 15 million passengers every day. So drivers feel like they have no choice but to join a union, a taxi association that supposedly protects their job. Except in reality, the taxi union bosses and the owners of these taxis the workers are driving are the ones pocketing most of the cash. So combine the extreme poverty with a limited number of taxi routes, the constant fear of being shot or attacked, tough competition for passengers, weapons in ample supply, a very sensitive racial and political climate, along with powerful taxi union bosses that need to protect their cash flow and therefore their taxi routes, and you have the perfect climate for widespread organized violence and turf wars, where taxi unions fight over everything from routes to prices to the skin color of their members. That's why in South Africa, taxis are symbolic of two things: bad driving and violence.
Threatening me with a hammer. Now he's thrown it at my car.
Where the best way to compete for passengers is to hire a hitman to shoot at rival taxis. Over the last 20 years, half of all the assassinations in South Africa were related to taxi mafias. In an industry that transports more than 60% of South Africa's daily commuters, getting caught in the middle of a taxi war can mean death. These taxi unions don't just stop at shooting up their competitors' vans. They resort to all-out mafia tactics, intimidating passengers, burning vehicles, hiring hitmen to take out the boss of an opposing gang. And the government? They won't lift a finger because everyone knows. Not even a politician is too powerful for the taxi mafias to reach. One of the perks of being a taxi mafia boss is that you get to feast like a modern day king. But just because you can feast like a modern day king doesn't mean you should do so in an unhealthy manner. That's where Magic Spoon comes in, today's video sponsor. You guys know Magic Spoon right now, the insanely healthy cereal that maintains that healthiness while still tasting just as good as the sugary, delicious cereal you had as a kid. A cereal that you guys have been loving. And today, ironically, I don't have a bowl at this place, so we're gonna use this cup. So today we have blueberry, and Magic Spoon now has 13 to 14 grams of protein per serving, 3 to 4 net grams of carbs, and 0 grams of sugar. My favorite flavors are coca, chocolate, fruity, Lucifruit, and cinnamon. And lucky for you guys, you can build a variety pack with the link below where you can put together all these flavors and more. So support them and support your own health by heading to the link below, magicspoon.com/JakeTrent to grab a variety pack right now. And be sure to use the coupon code JakeTrent at checkout for $5 off your order, now in the US and Canada. Magic Spoon is so confident in the product that it's backed by 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for whatever reason, they will give you your money back. That's magicspoon.com/JakeTrent with the link below. And back to the video.
Because also I believe that it is according to God's will that the white race, which is in the majority in this country, should be preserved.
South African police are investigating a deadly taxi shooting in KwaZulu-Natal at the weekend.
To understand how the taxi mafia became so brutally violent, you need to understand where they came from. Between 1948 and 1994, South Africa was governed by an all-white apartheid government.
Policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word apartheid.
Apartheid, which means apartness in Afrikaans, was basically the South African version of segregation, just more brutally enforced. White people were completely separated from non-white people.
Accepting that there are differences between people
They didn't shop in the same stores, live in the same neighborhoods, or use the same public transport. The two main political parties that opposed the White National Party was called the Inkatha Freedom Party and the African National Congress, or ANC. These two groups were outlawed during apartheid, but they still worked illegally to get support for the liberation movement. And inside these two separate groups, black people from different tribes or regions of the country, like Zulu, Xhosa, Bapti, were forced to work together even though they didn't always want to, which obviously led to a lot of fighting and even more violence. Also segregated was the taxi industry, where taxis owned and operated by non-whites was pretty much non-existent, or so the government thought. As this underground taxi industry grew in South Africa, most drivers and associations would eventually become affiliated with either political parties for protection. Before 1987, the taxi industry in South Africa was highly regulated and tightly controlled. You needed a permit to operate a taxi under South African law, but permits were almost impossible to get as a black taxi owner or driver. But that didn't stop black entrepreneurs from operating taxis though. And even though it was illegal, a lot of these taxi drivers banded together to form small local associations. Then in 1979, the first real taxi association was started, the South African Black Taxi Association, or SABTA. Just a few years later, a rival association was formed, called the South African Long Distance Taxi Association, or SALDTA. With more and more political pressure being placed on the apartheid government, calls for deregulation, and the illegal taxis becoming more involved in the anti-apartheid political parties, the government eventually decided that trying to control the taxi industry wasn't worth the trouble. According to them, it had gotten too politicized, and that allowing black drivers into the industry would support the economy. But as always, there was a secret agenda, and the taxi industry was deregulated overnight. In 1987 and 88, a law with this giant name deregulated the entire taxi industry in the blink of an eye. Suddenly, black taxi owners could apply for permits to transport passengers, and you can imagine what happened next. Anyone with a dream to make it big and get rich wanted to get involved in this new legal business. Thousands and thousands of people rushed to get permits and started planning their routes. The only problem was, the deregulation happened overnight, so suddenly the permit offices were overcrowded. People were waiting months to get their paperwork approved, and eventually the only way to get your permit was to bribe the guy who was in charge. Permits were issued like confetti, and becoming a taxi driver was as simple as buying a taxi and a gun. With so many people flooding in, competition obviously grew insanely quickly. And competition without a stable justice system was the perfect recipe for violence. Taxi wars. All the while, the government stood by doing nothing. And that wasn't a coincidence. That secret agenda we talked about earlier, it was now fully in play. As was typical for the apartheid government, they found a new way to sow discord. By leaving the taxi unions to destroy each other, the security services wouldn't have to. And it worked. The taxi wars that broke out after deregulation killed many liberation leaders, and deepened the divides between the ethnic groups that were once part of the same political movements. For a while, it looked like the National Party's plan to slow down the revolutionary movement had worked, but then came discussions to end apartheid, and with this, everyone expected the violence to end. Big mistake. Between 1990 and 1994, the South African government was in talks to formally put an end to apartheid. But instead of this news bringing peace, the violence just got worse. One of the worst taxi wars in history was the Cape Peninsula Taxi War, which lasted from 1990 to 1992. Two rival taxi gangs, the Laguna Taxi Association and the Western Cape Black Taxi Association, went to war. It started with a shootout outside a mall in Cape Town, and it caused hundreds of deaths over the next 2 years. What was the fighting about? Permits. One side had been granted permits for a valuable route that the other side was excluded from, so they decided to take it by force. At least that was the official story. Most analysts say the wars were state-sponsored, supported by the state so it would destabilize the African communities in the region that supported liberation. And again, it worked. In 1991, an ANC member and the chair of the Western Cape Civic Community said that he was concerned that there were unseen forces orchestrating and encouraging the violence. A week later, the apartheid government confiscated his gun, claiming it was illegal, and 3 weeks after that, he was assassinated. In the words of Cape community leader Gladstone Ntamo, this war is not a political war, not over routes and ranks. The government has gotten an opportunity with the taxi war to create a bigger violence. And after the Cape Peninsula Taxi War, the two associations were merged to form COTA, and for a minute it seemed like there might be peace. Until disagreements broke out, leading some to break out to form a new association called CATA. These two taxi associations operated mainly in low-income areas around Cape Town, and to this day, they are two of the most ruthless taxi mafias in the country. And if people thought apartheid was gonna bring peace and unity to the taxi industry, once again, another big mistake. Apartheid ended in 1994, and the African National Congress or ANC takes control of the government, and they immediately tried to re-regulate the taxi industry. But if they thought that was gonna be easy, they had another thing coming for them. Every time they tried to put new laws in place to stabilize the industry, the taxi associations would just become more and more violent. Because the taxi unions have been left to do whatever they wanted for the last 10 years, they have become more than just taxis. They extorted people and businesses to get better work opportunities, and sometimes they even offer protection from other gangs and associations to their loyal customers. The apartheid police had left the towns and black communities to fend for themselves, and the taxi operators were the only ones with the power and muscle to do it, so they became their own quasi-police force. With so much power, they weren't just gonna let the government tell them what to do. But what really cemented their position as taxi mafias were the turf wars. In 1990, South Africa was hit with a recession. This doubled the price of buying a taxi, and layoffs meant less people taking taxis to work. So taxi gangs got desperate to control their routes, so they went to war. And by the late 90s, it's estimated that more than 2,000 people died from taxi-related violence, according to official stats. But that number is probably a lot higher. For taxi drivers, it wasn't just a struggle for customers, it was a struggle to survive. If you couldn't meet the daily quota your taxi owner required, you would go home empty-handed and your family would starve. With so much competition to get the valuable routes and transport the most customers, at least one driver was being killed every single day. It was kill or be killed. And where was the ANC government in all of this? Their hands were tied. Even they knew the taxi industry was just too big and powerful to take on right after taking power. With the government standing on the sidelines, the two main taxi associations, CADA and CODA, were in an all-out war in Cape Town. They had local government officials, political figures, and South African police officers all on their payroll to exert even more power over the people and the routes they controlled. Whenever a new law-abiding taxi association would form and be granted legal transport routes with the local government, there would be an angry group of drivers who would start their own illegal taxi station to try to take over the routes. When the legal association goes to the local government for help, the illegal taxis are fined or impounded, and then the violence starts. The illegal drivers would turn to their mafia for help, and the turf war begins. And because the local government doesn't have enough power to stop the fighting, the legal taxi operators just end up joining the opposing taxi association, and so the taxi wars continue. People are killed, taxis are set on fire, often with their passengers still inside, and the taxi bosses are shot inside their home.
A seemingly ordinary Saturday night goes horribly wrong. 3 men approach this house. They're seen being let in by a young boy and open fire, killing 42-year-old Arlene Diosi in full view of family and friends. Unbeknown to the gunmen, they were caught on these CCTV cameras installed at Diosi's Bloekombo's home.
And if you're a taxi driver in South Africa and you're looking for someone to take out your competition, you have a very unique resource available to you, the Nakabis. If you're in the market for an assassin in South Africa, the person you're looking for is a Nakabi. Nakabi is the Zulu word for hitman, and hit squads are an essential part of any taxi association. Most of the hitmen are even employed on a retainer, like you would employ a lawyer, and some are paid per hit. Many of these hitmen are former Askaris or professional assassins who were once soldiers. Once you meet a Nakabi, he'll give you his price list. The cost for each person in a hit depends on their position in the association, how many taxis they own, and how well protected they are.
At 17, his first kill earned him and 2 others 20,000 rand. Within a few years, he was earning up to R250,000 rand for each hit.
For a low-level member, you're looking at around $1,500. For a boss, it's $18,000. If you're looking to assassinate a passenger, it's only $100. If you're looking to assassinate a driver, it's only $200. Pretty good deal if you ask me. In the eyes of a Nakabi, his work is nothing more than that, work. Like a true hitman, he has no affiliation or loyalty. His only loyalty is to the highest bidder.
How many people would you say you killed?
Ngengishi number kodetselos. Mhlawumbe let's say umsebenzi ngenyanga uyaqhamuka ngo4. Ukuthi wenzeni asihlangane lapho thina sazothi shaya isipani. Angilona igwala, angikaze ngifikelwe ukutatazela njengoba ngayitshela ukuthi ngenza lento le mase kufikile ukuthi kanjalo ngiyayenza it's like playing, it's like a sport.
The taxi industry in South Africa is worth more than $1 billion a year. In America, this may not seem like much, but in South Africa, it's really good money. The only problem is almost none of it goes to the actual people doing the work, the taxi drivers. The $150 they earn every month isn't even enough to cover rent, and that doesn't even include food. So in order to survive, they have to drive like maniacs to get as many customers as possible so they can make more money than what they owe the taxi owner for using their vehicle every day. That's why if you try to steal customers from another taxi to make an extra $1 or $2, there's a good chance that you will be killed. In the 27 years after apartheid ended, the taxi associations are stronger than ever. This year, riots and looting broke out in South Africa after the previous president Jacob Zuma was arrested and sent to jail for contempt of court.
In the past days, looting has spread from stores to factories and warehouses, ransacking and rioting in South Africa's worst violence since apartheid. From the eastern provinces of KwaZulu-Natal to Johannesburg's economic hub.
All of the doors are open. People are walking in.
Highways on fire, skies full of smoke. The police hopelessly outnumbered.
The protest started out fueled by actual politics, but then it quickly turned into a free-for-all shopping spree.
The authorities have made nearly 2,000 arrests nationwide, but they are not in control. On the River Horse Industrial Estate, the police unit fired tear gas and rubber bullets in an attempt to clear the park.
Police couldn't handle it alone, and the military was only deployed near the end, so the taxi drivers did their job for them. Because looting and destroying shops would mean worker layoffs, empty shops would mean no more shoppers, and both these things would leave taxis without passengers. So they blockaded the roads to major shopping centers and malls, proving again that in many cases, taking the law into their own hands isn't just the taxi industry's MO, it's their only option. Quote, "We were not trained in policing, but we are capable of defending whatever comes our way. We'll defend the business industry and that of others. If you loot, you will meet the long arm of the law after we catch you."
I have to die for defending the community that I'm living within it. It's fine with me.
When I started researching this video, I had no idea any of this stuff was happening, so let me know what you guys thought about it in the comments below. And one cool thing that I wanted to share with you guys is that a ton of really successful entrepreneurs watch this channel. And the reason I know this is that they reach out to me all the time, especially on Instagram. And I've hung out with a few of them too. And again, these are like wildly successful entrepreneurs that have made way more money than me. They've built super massive companies and brands, and they all watch the same channel that you guys are enjoying right now. So I wanted to share that with you guys because by watching this channel, you are aligning yourself with the right crowd. Speaking of watching this channel, if you're not already, click that subscribe button because we make video essays, documentaries just like this one every single week on the most provocative stuff in the world of money, power, war, and crime. So if you enjoyed this video, you're really gonna enjoy the other ones too. And speaking of reaching out to me on Instagram, you can follow me on Instagram for more day in the life kind of stuff at jaketrend.io. Guys, watching to the end of these videos is like the #1 way to help out the YouTube algorithm. So seriously, thank you so much for being part of the Watch That End Club. Keep sharpening that mind, stay dangerous out there, and I will see you guys in the next one.